What's up guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled Why a US Ground Invasion Looks Increasingly Likely, which tough topic, but I'm glad that I don't have a tough crowd because you guys have been so nice with my learning journey, everything that I am taking in right now when it comes to the content. And I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful that you guys are open-minded and respectful in the comments, so I wanted to thank you guys for that. But yeah, I saw a few comments in a past video that a ground invasion might happen, since apparently it's kind of like it kind of goes by stages and it's coming to that point, which sounds terrifying. But let's see what this video is about.
When the war in Iran kicked off last week, there was a widespread assumption that, however it went, the US would not be putting boots on the ground. Not only would a ground invasion risk turning what Trump apparently originally envisioned as a quick Venezuela-style decapitation into a prolonged Afghanistan-style quagmire, but it would also be incredibly politically risky, given that Trump...
Can someone explain what the word quagmire means? Because I've heard it so many times in the past few videos, and I still, like, the only reference to quagmire I have is from Family Guy. So I think it's a word and it means something, but I don't know what it means. I've never heard that word before.
Afghanistan-style quagmire. But it would also be incredibly politically risky, given that Trump campaigned against so-called forever wars and has done very little proverbial pitch rolling. However, on Monday, Trump opened the door to the possibility, telling the New York Post that apparently, unlike his predecessors, quote, "I don't have the yips with respect to boots on the ground." And his war secretary, Pete Hegseth, also refused to rule it out at a press conference at about the same time. So in this video, we thought we'd do our best to explain why a ground invasion looks at least more likely than it did a week or so ago, and ask whether it would be a good idea. If you've read George Orwell's 1984, you might remember the book's three powerful superstates, covering today's US, Russia, and China. In the latest issue of our magazine, we're considering how these Orwellian spheres of influence are taking shape, and whether we're entering a new age of empires. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, without further ado, the basic reason that boots on the ground now looks more likely than it did a week ago is that, as we mentioned in our previous video, Trump's two preferred outcomes, the first being a Venezuela-style outcome, where Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is succeeded by a relatively pragmatic regime insider who's more keen on doing a deal, and the second being regime change via a popular protest, looked less likely than they did last week. On the question of a Venezuela-style outcome, the bookie's current favourite to succeed Khamenei is his son Mojtaba, who has a reputation for being both more hardline and, unfortunately for ordinary Iranians, less competent, and will presumably be unwilling to do any sort of deal with the people who just assassinated his father.
No good.
Moreover, on Wednesday morning, Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, announced that any new leader of the Iranian regime would be, quote, an unequivocal target for elimination, no matter what his name is, which does seem to functionally preclude a Venezuela-style outcome. So, on the question of protests instead, while the regime is still incredibly unpopular, Khamenei's death seems to have mobilized the minority of Iranians that still support it. And at least judging by videos on social media, the pro-regime protests, or at least the anti-Israel/America protests, look a lot bigger than the anti-regime ones at the moment. While it's obviously very difficult to properly gauge sentiment inside Iran, there have been numerous reports that the severity of the ongoing bombing campaign, which has already included strikes on a primary school and a hospital, has stoked anti-American and anti-Israel sentiment, which might plausibly make ordinary Iranians less likely to heed Trump's calls for protests.
True.
Again, maybe it's too early to be pessimistic. Trump has advised that protesters wait until the war is over before trying their luck. And it's worth noting that if Mojtaba does indeed succeed his father, in the medium to long term, this will probably make the regime's demise more likely, given Mojtaba's apparent incompetence and the fact that things didn't end too brilliantly for Iran's last hereditary leader. Nonetheless, it's at least true that neither are more pliant success.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't sound like very, how would you say it? Very stable. Um, mm, mm, mm. I don't know what would happen. I mean, if it goes there like that it's like automatically it's going to be him, then I don't think it's going to last very long, especially given the situation right now. But if they do change it, like how would people perceive it since they've been the same way for so long?
Given Mushtaba's apparent incompetence and the fact that things didn't end too brilliantly for Iran's last hereditary leader. Nonetheless, it's at least true that neither a more pliant successor nor a protest-induced regime change look likely in the short term. So given no clean outcome looks immediately forthcoming, in the past couple of days journalists have started asking the administration how long they expect the war to go on for. This was a question put to Hegseth on Monday, and this was his response.
No, but we're not going to go into the exercise of what we will or will not do. I think it's one of those fallacies for a long time that this department or presidents or others should tell the American people, this, and our enemies, by the way, here's exactly what we'll do. Here's exactly how long we'll go. Here's exactly how far we'll go. Here's what we're willing to do and not do. It's foolishness.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
And so President Trump ensures that our enemies understand we'll go as far as we need to go to advance American interests. But we're not dumb about it. You don't have to roll 200,000 people in there and stay for 20 years.
Hegseth didn't give a specific time frame and basically said that the war could continue until the US had executed what it needs. This puts pressure on the administration to more clearly articulate its military objectives in Iran, and Trump duly laid them out in a press conference a day later. According to Trump, the US has 4 military objectives in Iran: destroy Iran's missile capabilities, annihilate their navy, ensure Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon, and ensure that Iran cannot arm, fund, and direct proxies outside of Iran. These are some pretty maximalist objectives. Taken together, they basically imply Iran's total demilitarization and will probably require the Iranian regime to essentially surrender. The problem here, however, is that history suggests that air power alone isn't sufficient for such maximalist objectives. Air campaigns often achieve impressive tactical success, but there aren't many examples of air campaigns achieving big strategic objectives. In fact, according to historian Robert Pape, who wrote his seminal book on the topic called Bombing to Win, air power alone has never toppled a government, even when paired with intelligence, and very rarely achieves meaningful political change. Perhaps the closest parallel to today is the 1991 air campaign against Saddam Hussein's.
So they're saying that judging by history, this is probably not going to work only with air, but at the same time, I feel like we've advanced a lot when it comes to all of the aircrafts and everything, so it must not be exactly the same as in history. But okay.
Will change. Perhaps the closest parallel to today is the 1991 air campaign against Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Much like today, at the time, George H.W. Bush was calling on the Iraqi people to rise up and encouraging Kurdish rebels in the north. But a brief uprising was brutally repressed, the Iraqi regime survived, and Saddam was only ousted when the US staged a ground invasion in 2001. The US and Israel already seem to have tacitly realized this, which is why they're apparently trying to convince Kurdish militias in Iraq to stage a ground invasion. And there was even a report in a Saudi news outlet earlier this week that Israeli special forces entered Iran on Monday night. But if neither Kurdish militias nor Israeli special forces prove sufficient, a US ground invasion will probably emerge as the only way for Trump to achieve his maximalist objectives. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that this is definitely going to happen, and the odds are still probably below 50%. It's still very possible that the regime crumbles or is overthrown, or that Iran descends into a messy civil war. It's also worth noting that Iran is incredibly difficult to invade. After all, it's a
I think right now a civil war sounds more likely. Well, it also depends on how fast everything needs to happen. But if the situation would now just like if we just let it be, I think a civil war it's nearly inevitable.
War. It's also worth noting that Iran is incredibly difficult to invade. After all, it's a massive country covered in mountains. It's also possible that the regime survives, but Trump just decides to withdraw anyway, and blame it on ordinary Iranians for not protesting hard enough. Nonetheless, the odds of boots on the ground are at least higher than they were a few weeks ago, and it would be a remarkable U-turn from a president who rose to political prominence criticising forever wars. As we mentioned earlier, the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, is out very soon, and if you subscribe using code
SPRING26, is this the last thing is just an advert. So that was all of it. That was a very brief explanation of why a ground invasion would happen. So basically the 2 points that I got from this is because history says so, and because it would make them get to their objectives quicker. Which, I mean, if this is true and Israeli special forces operated on the ground in Iran overnight, I think it's more likely that that would happen, but I would hope not. I don't understand the fighting back at this point, but there's a lot of things that I don't understand. So either way, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I really hope you found it informative. Please leave a like, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!